Qualquer um que curte aviação e história já ouviu falar no SR-71 Blackbird, o mítico reconhecedor estratégico dos Estados Unidos na Guerra Fria, o mais veloz jato militar já operado por uma força aérea. Mas, antes do Blackbird, houve o YF-12, e antes dele o mais secreto de todos, o A-12, cuja existência só foi oficialmente reconhecida em 1991, mais de 20 anos depois da última missão dele. Então, se prepare para esse vídeo. Se prepare para entrar nesse mundo secreto, na Área 51. A verdade está lá fora. Vem comigo! Bem-vindo a bordo! E, né, Kowalski, se você não leu errado o título desse vídeo, no 30º documento Revista Asas, com o apoio dos nossos parceiros, a Embraer, a El Sistemas, a Goodyear e o Hangar 33, você vai conosco conversar com o veterano da Área 51, Thornton D. Barnes, uma entrevista exclusiva e inédita aqui no canal da Revista Asas, sobre a mais famosa base secreta do planeta, a mítica Área 51, e a mais incrível linhagem de jatos secretos operacionais dos Estados Unidos em toda a Guerra Fria. Os fantásticos Lockheed A-12, o super caça YF-12, o super jato M21 com seu drone espião e o mítico SR-71 Blackbird. A história por quem viveu a história. Então, meu amigo, já dá aí a sua curtida no vídeo, se inscreve no canal. E agora, né, Kowalski? Senta que aí vem história. E é top secret. O veterano do Exército dos Estados Unidos e da CIA, o texano Thornton D. Barnes, mora hoje em Nevada, bem perto de onde passou boa parte da sua carreira de serviços em programas secretos. No exército americano, ele se tornou especialista em radares, e foi essa capacitação que interessou a CIA, quando ela trabalhava num avião espião com a Lockheed, para substituir o U-2. E para isso, essa aeronave devia ter uma performance inédita de altitude e velocidade, e também ser pouco detectável por radar, o que nós chamamos hoje de stealth, né? O popular avião invisível. Esse programa secreto, o Oxcart, resultou num dos mais fantásticos aviões de toda a Guerra Fria, o Lockheed A-12. Foram construídos apenas 15, 6 foram perdidos, mas era um avião tão secreto que depois de operar em 1967 e 68, todos os 9 que restaram ficaram 22 anos guardados sob alto segredo em Palmdale, na Califórnia, até o governo norte-americano reconhecer que o A-12 existia, em 1991. T.D. Barnes participou de diversas fases desses programas secretos de aeronaves na Área 51, fazendo parte da seleta turma de especialistas arregimentados pela CIA, que acabaram formando uma fraternidade, como ele comentou comigo nessa entrevista. Não por acaso, ele é presidente de uma associação desses veteranos, a Roadrunner, reconhecida no Hall da Fama Aeroespacial de Nevada. Autor de diversos livros, para muitos, ele é um dos maiores conhecedores da história da Área 51 e dos aviões que lá voaram. Mas, apesar de já ter visto algumas das máquinas voadoras mais incríveis que já rasgaram os céus, T.D. Barnes ficou surpreso de ser procurado por um jornalista do Brasil. E feliz com o nosso interesse. Assim, da sua casa em Nevada, ele concedeu uma entrevista exclusiva para o nosso canal. E tem mais, hein? Durante essa entrevista você vai ver imagens incríveis, muitas nunca mostradas antes na mídia brasileira, que o nosso entrevistado nos cedeu graciosamente para esse vídeo. Bem-vindo ao nosso canal, T.D. agradeço o seu tempo para conversar com o canal da Revista Asas no YouTube. Vamos começar falando sobre o seu papel no Exército dos Estados Unidos e de como isso o levou a ir trabalhar para a CIA, a Agência de Inteligência Norte-Americana. Conta pra gente.
I joined the United States Army in 1954. Went to Korea, where I served as Army Intelligence Specialist. Came back to Fort Bliss, Texas, where I started surface to air missiles and radar school. Spent 2.5 years in nothing. I've been going electronic school during the day and in college at night. I had my first exposure to the CIA and Area 51, although I didn't know it at the time, while I was at the Army at Fort Bliss, Texas. The CIA got wind that the Russians had this new radar, the talking radar. And they moved it to Cuba. They needed to know whether or not this radar was going to be able to track the A-12 that they're getting ready to build and eventually shoot it down. I was well advanced into my field. They recruited me to go on a couple flights where we would actually spoof the radar, make them the Russians turn it on and see what it could do. And the bottom line is that we determined then that we were building a plane that would never be able to fly over Russia without the danger of being shot down.
Ok, mas por que a CIA estava procurando pessoas do Exército Norte-Americano e da Força Aérea?
For these answers, we have to go back all the way back to World War II. We came out of the World War II in a Cold War with Russia. Russia sealed off its borders. Every May Day, they had these parades in red squares showing up the latest bombers, the latest missiles. We didn't know what was going on behind the Iron Curtain. We woke up one morning with Sputnik, beep, beep, beep in the air. Russia put the first man in space, the first woman in space, the first 3 cosmonauts in space. It shot off the first ICBM. It had exploded the hydrogen bomb. It had a brand new bomber that it was flying, that we were sitting in a red square. We were scared to death of being invaded by Russia. We decided to build a U-2 spy plane. The president did not want military people flying a plane over Russia or any other enemy territory, so it picked the CIA. The CIA picked Lockheed to build the plane, so they needed a place to test flight in secrecy. This was more secret than our atomic bomb program, the Manhattan program. They chose Nevada. That was the West Coast line of defense during World War II. We moved everything out of California to Nevada, thinking the Japanese were going to overrun the West Coast. Everybody's here, the Coast Guard, the Navy, Marine Corps, Army. What better place than a state that had only 237,000 people in the entire state, and most of them was already working for the government.
Era imperativo que fossem pilotos civis fazendo esses voos de espionagem sobre a Rússia, porque se fossem pilotos militares da ativa da Força Aérea e fossem abatidos e capturados, o voo poderia ser considerado até mesmo um ato de guerra. Portanto, para fazer o desenvolvimento do U-2, seus voos de teste e o treinamento dos pilotos selecionados para voá-lo, essa base aérea secreta da CIA foi estabelecida em Groom Lake, Nevada, e ficou conhecida como Área 51. Didi, como foi o seu envolvimento inicial lá, trabalhando para a CIA?
The Nessa station I was on was 65 miles from Area 51. It was also a member of the CIA's Seven Sisters. Very few people ever knew this. Anytime the flight was originating out of Area 51 with the A-12, the YF-12, or the drone mothership that we flew out, that they later flew out there, they would notify what we called the Seven Sisters. That was my radar site and 6 Air Defense Command radar sites that were in the region. They did not want us recording it, and they are wanting us talking about it. Everything was top secret. However, they didn't want us to keep an eye on it in case something happened. We would know where and what happened.
Mas com certeza, esses voos não passavam sem ser notados pelo controle aéreo norte-americano, certo?
The FAA, Federal Aviation Agency, would also notify all your airports, like Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Phoenix, that there's going to be a plane flying that day. And for their radar people not to report it, not to say, gee whiz, did you see that? So a lot of notifications went out anytime a plane was being flown to keep everybody from talking.
Não é exagero dizer que o Lockheed A-12, desenvolvido no programa Oxcart da CIA, foi a aeronave operacional mais secreta dos Estados Unidos em toda a Guerra Fria. Chegando a Mach 3.35 e voando a 95 mil pés, ele era mais veloz e voava mais alto do que o SR-71 Blackbird, que chegava a Mach 3.32 e 85 mil pés, respectivamente. Então, Tidi, pode nos contar um pouco mais sobre essa incrível família de jatos da Lockheed?
Keep in mind that we're talking about a plane that's flying 90,000 feet altitude and over 2,200 miles an hour. That's faster than a rifle bullet, Mach 3. So we were creating, you might say, UFO sightings left and right. We flew 2,850 missions out of Area 51 in the A-12 that no one ever knew about. They would see us occasionally, and they'd report, "Man, did you see that? What was that?" And it was us. I mentioned a slew of Blackbird names just a minute ago, the YF-12, D-21, and so forth. I need to explain that. The A-12 was the first plane. That was the CIA's spy plane. Top secret. I mean, super top secret. Off of that, we modified 3 of them to be a Air Force interceptor. We called it the YF-12. We took her cameras out of the A-12, put it in a second seat because the A-12 was a one-seater, one passenger. Put a second seat in it and hung missiles on it, changed the nose of it, put a radar in it, and gave the Air Force a Mach 3 interceptor. With the idea that if the bombers were coming in from Russia at that speed, they could intercept those bombers with nuclear missiles before they ever got into American airspace. We took another plane, there are actually 2 of them, A-12s, and we modified them into being a mothership. We called it the M21, just reversed the 12 to 21. The idea was that it had a ramjet that started, it didn't run until you got it up 3,000 miles an hour, or 2,200 miles an hour, Mach 3. The idea for the mothership and the drone was to fly the drones, launch them over China to locate the Chinese missile activity and photograph it, drop the film off at sea and pick it up with a ship. And or we even had a C-130 that had a netting on it that's supposed to be able to pick them up. Didn't work very well. But that was ideal. So that was the 2 modifications or 2 variants that we had made of the A-12. And then came the 4th Blackbird. Everybody knows about the SR-71. That was the Air Force, strict Air Force. And like I said, no one knew about the A-12. It stayed secret from the first flight in 1962. The CIA released that it existed in 1991.
O YF-12 também não se tornou operacional, porque no final dos anos 60 a maior ameaça nuclear eram os mísseis intercontinentais, e não mais os bombardeiros soviéticos. Nós comentamos que a performance do A-12 era superior à do SR-71, mas todos os registros de records são do SR-71, do Blackbird. Por que isso?
The A-12 never got to claim any speed record because it's top secret. No one knew it existed in 1991. We did the YF-12 speed runs on May 1st, 1965, and set a whole slew of world records. Because President Johnson, he just had to announce to the world that we had a Mach 3 plane. We couldn't shut him up. One dude at A-12, and the CIA said, "No way, Jose." And then later on, the SR-71 did some speed runs. And you read all the books, and all the records show the SR-71 being the fastest plane ever built. Because you remember, when we put the second person in those other 3 variants of the A-12, we had to put in life support systems, a whole lot of stuff. And the added weight cost them 5,000 feet of altitude. It cost a little bit of speed, not much on the speed, because all of them used the J58 engine, same engine. And there wasn't that much different, but altitude-wise, because every pound crosses a foot of altitude. Well, the U-2s, when they were being spotted, they were silver, we put a coat of paint on the U-2 plane. The weight of the paint cost us 1,500 feet of altitude. So the bottom line is the A-12 is the fastest, is faster than the SR-71, the family model.
Por razões de orçamento, o programa do A-12 foi paralisado em 1966 e as operações em maio de 68, depois de uma última missão sobre a Coreia do Norte. As principais missões da CIA com o A-12, olha essas fotos reais feitas nesses voos, foram sobre o Veterano do Norte e a Coreia do Norte. A aposentadoria do A-12 também foi em função da inteligência dos Estados Unidos passar a dispor de satélites espiões com sensores eficazes e da Força Aérea passar a operar, a partir de janeiro de 68, o SR-71 Blackbird. Tedê, pode nos contar mais sobre o A-12 e como era o seu trabalho, sendo um dos especialistas envolvidos com os programas secretos de aeronaves na Área 51?
One thing I didn't talk about was the A-12 was America's first stealth plane. The CIA insisted on it being stealth, not only fast, but stealth. We put it on pylons, and this is where I come in. This is my thing with radar. American radar, Russian radar, didn't matter. We had it all. We had every radar. Oh man. Anyway, we put the plane out on the pylon, or we called it the pole, and it actually two battleship drive shafts that we welded together, and like a lift in a service station. You know, it lowered in the ground. We put the plane on it, and then lifted up to 60 foot high or whatever. Anyway, we'd look at this plane with all this radar and make changes on it, shapes, whatever, mostly the shapes, until we made it into a stealth plane. The A-12, it carried 80,000 pounds of fuel, first of all. No way you can hide 80,000 pounds of fuel from radar. So we had to live with that. Also, it got up as high as, one place dipped 2,200 degrees, but most of it is, in the 800 degree range. Very hot plane. Infrared picked it up, in a flash. So there's no way we could defeat that or cool it down. So we couldn't make it completely stealth. We made it about 90% stealth, and that carried over into the drone that I mentioned. It was stealth, and it carried over into the SR-71. But then that's what we continued. We won't talk much about this, but in 1968, we stopped flying any planes out of Area 51, except the MiGs. We're still doing those. But as far as the reconnaissance planes, A-12s and that sort of thing. But we were working on stealth. That was our thing. And we continued to do stealth and exploiting enemy aircraft. But I did want to mention that we did have a stealth plane. Let's talk about working at Area 51 and how you get recruited. You don't apply for a job at a place that doesn't exist, and it didn't officially exist. It does now. It's now known as it does have an airport identifier since the Air Force took it over. But back then in our day, it did not exist. It had all kind of names attached to it, just so we could identify it. The CIA identified it as mainly Area 51 because that was the grid that it was in when they enlarged it. Actually, the YouTube program, which was named Watertown. Area 51 did not exist at that time. It's only when they withdrew this land from the Atomic Energy Commission, it had a grid number that was number 51, and that's what we called Area 51. The CIA identified it as Station D. Not many people know that, but that was the identification within the CIA. And that was because it had the field bases A, B, and C. That was your U-2 bases, one in Turkey, one in Germany, and one in Japan. And the home base, which was Area 51, was Station D.
E de onde vinham os pilotos que voavam os A-12 da CIA? Como eles eram treinados para voar esse avião?
The pilots that the CIA recruited were all Air Force fighter pilots. They were cream of the crop. The Air Force worked for CIA, by the way, at Area 51. We had Air Force there. They did not report up the chain of command. They weren't allowed to. they reported strictly to the CIA. A lot of people don't realize this, but see, there's about 70% of your intelligence agencies are military, attached to the agency. So anyway, we had the pilots would be selected by the Air Force, and they'd be sent back to Washington for interviews. They didn't know who was interviewing them or what for. They thought they'd be an interview to be astronauts. And they'd give them tests, and it went through a long process, come and go. And they'd get to the point where they were set, they screened them out. And they finally would ask them or say, all right, we would like to have you work at on a secret project. And the pilot would say, well, what is it? And they said, well, we can't tell you. Well, where is it? Well, we can't tell you. All we say is west of the Mississippi River. Well, what is it? We can't tell you. And the pilots, honest to God, would not know where they're going to be working or what they're going to be flying until they opened the hangar doors at Area 51. And we had a few, not many. Take one look at, I'm not going to fly that. And they wouldn't do it. But what we'd do then, we called it sheep dipping. They would resign their commissions out of the Air Force and sign a contract with the CIA, become civilian contractors. And they'd fly for the CIA for the life of the program. And then the Air Force would tear up their resignations as though they never happened, promote them up to what the rank they should have, and they would finish their military career as though they'd never been with the CIA. Well, that was the process we used. And I'll talk a little bit about how we trained the pilots. These planes were built by Lockheed, the U-2 and the Blackbirds. Lockheed test pilots were the first ones to fly it. And then once they got them to the point that they were ready to start testing them at Area 51, which was the only place they ever flew them, by the way. They couldn't fly them at their home locations. Anyway, they come out there. Once the test pilots were convinced that they were ready to be moved on into testing stage, they had Air Force instructor pilots that were trained in the trainer. We had one plane that had a second seat in it, and that's the trainer. We called it the Titanium Goose. And the Air Force instructor pilots then would train the CIA pilots. And I might make a point, because no Air Force pilot ever flew the operational A-12 planes. Never. Only the CIA and the Lockheed test pilots. No CIA pilot ever flew a SR-71. SR-71 was never at Area 51. It was an Air Force plane, stationed first at Edwards Air Force Base, and then it transferred to the Beale Air Force Base. It wasn't secret. Some of it secret, but the fact that it existed was not secret, whereas the A-12 was secret. And talk about the A-12, the 1,280 flights that I said we had, we'd leave a horrible sonic boom at times. We tried to fly in non-populated areas. But mind you, a 4-hour flight going 2,200 miles an hour, you cover a lot of territory. You take a little spin down to Florida and back in that time. So anyway, we tried to avoid populated areas, but every now and then we'd leave a sonic boom, and people would complain. Well, the Air Force and Navy did not know what we had out there, even our own Air Force and Navy. But they would take the blame for the sonic booms, so that we would not get exposed to what we were flying out there.
E como era a vida de vocês, que trabalhavam para a CIA nesses programas secretos em Groom Lake, na Área 51?
Initially, the CIA planned on everyone living at Area 51. They didn't think we'd leave for town maybe 4 or 5 times a year. It was always expected to leave there. So they put in everything that we needed there. We had arrangements for laundry, driver's license testing. We had recreation. We had everything. We had a swimming pool. We had a 3-hole golf course, tennis courts, anything like that we wanted. We had a movie theater. It cost us 25 cents to show the movie. And we had a mess hall 24 hours a day. that had absolutely the best food in the world. The CIA was excellent about that. They tried to keep us happy out there. You got to keep in mind, we flew up on Monday morning and came home Friday night. We stayed up there all week. Originally they wanted to stay up there all the time, but that didn't work out. So anyway, we would come home for the weekends. And another ironic thing about it is our families had no idea where we was working or what we were doing. We were compartmentalized out there. It wasn't so much with the U-2 and the A-12 programs. Well, they were the only thing going on out there. But when I got there in 1968, we were bringing in the MiG planes, and that was neat to know. The A-12 people, the Oshkosh people, the U-2 people, had no need to know what we were doing with the MiG-21s, nor did the MiG people need to know what we were doing with the A-12 that was just moving out at the time. So everything became very compartmentalized. We did not mix, even at the mess hall. You did not talk shop. Even in my group, as we expanded into other projects, after we quit flying the A-12, we were doing stealth, and we had different companies that were, building prototypes. We called them proof of concept or technology demonstrators. And they'd build them, like Boeing would build theirs up in Seattle. Lockheed might build theirs at Burbank or at Lockheed. And then they'd bring them to Area 51 to test them. And we would put them on the pole and look at them with all this radar. We were doing all this stuff. But as the program grew, the CIA was actually in the business of providing services. Had all the equipment and had us special projects people with all the knowledge, and everybody would come in, whether it be the Air Force, the Navy, another agency, or whoever it was, aerospace company. They were our customers. We serviced them and provided our services. But it got to the point, there was 30 people in my special projects group for CIA. And we all worked in the same building. We worked together, we played together. But when we got to work, as the other projects came in, maybe one of the guys or two of the guys would have a project for a customer that just for them. And we did not have the need to know who that customer was, what they were working on or what they were doing. So once we got into our own building, we knew basically what they was doing. And if you needed help with something, you say, hey, Joe, come give me a hand with this. But you didn't go in and say, what is it? What in the world are you working on? Or how's it work? Or who are you doing this for? You did not ask questions. It was strictly need to know. And the way this worked, I would have been very highly resentful if one of my buddies had said, who are you doing this for? It's none of his business. We reported only to the CIA and to that customer, and that was it. And that's the reason today there's so few records of what we did in existence, because when we had a meeting out there, we didn't allow pencil and paper. That was top secret, and you had to process it as such. So we just did not take notes, and then we didn't talk to each other unless it was strictly need to know. No one at that time was allowed to live in Nevada except the CIA's permanent party. We could because we were part of the CIA's, although we were all contractors. Also, your cooks and people like that could live local. But everyone else had to live out of state because they didn't want a bunch of strangers showing up in Nevada that had a very low population. So everybody commuted, but we commuted separately. And even in my group, working for the CIA Special Projects, there was 5 of us that did not even fly with the other guys. Most of the people flew out of the Nellis Air Force Base, a very, very secure area at Nellis Air Force Base. At the time, the F-111s were there. And they would fly out there, but I flew out in Queen Air. We were given special treatment. I won't say special treatment, but we were special. Because of our fields and how far advanced we were. But anyway, that's how we flew to work. But the Wise would take us out to drop us off at the plane, not knowing where we was going or what we was going to be doing, and then pick us up Friday night. The thing that when the CIA recruited us, and particularly in my group, and I think this applied to just about straight across the board, we had something in common. Half of my group had boats on Lake Mead, and we would play all weekend together on Lake Mead. We didn't associate outside of our group. The other half had cabins up on Mount Charleston, which is outside of Las Vegas. You got pine trees, no running streams or anything, but it does have trees. And that's what they had to talk about and plan about all weekend, was make plans for the weekend. And the wives were great about having all the chores done. We didn't have to come home and do a bunch of chores. Every weekend was like a vacation for us. Daddy's coming home to be with the kids and the wives. And we would head out to the lake. We had our own little secret place we went out to and drop anchor with all of our boats, and we'd spend the weekend playing out there. And to this day, back then we had no divorces. I mean, that's part of this. I think that's part of the screening that the CIA did. Was the families were very, very stable. We had no divorces, and even today, the widows of pilots and different people we lost during the program back in the '60s still come to our every reunion. We know each other's kids. We know each other's grandkids. We bonded a family that has never drifted apart. And that's something unique about Area 51. Back to the accommodations. We had housing there. Every time I got there, the early guys, you two guys in trailer houses, very, very poor conditions. But we moved in from 4 places. 4 of us lived in each house. We had a little common room, and we'd have poker games at night and do whatever we wanted to. Or we'd go to the bowling alley. We had the bowling, we had swimming, all that kind of stuff. But we lived there all week, and we come home on Friday nights. My wife found out where I worked and what I did
4 o'clock.
in 2009. The CIA brought us back to CIA headquarters for the dedication of the A-12 plane on campus. And that's when the director released us to tell the wives where we worked and what we did.
Muito obrigado, Tini Barnes, Dimido Kowalski, por essa grande oportunidade. E você, gostou desse bate-papo com esse veterano da Área 51? Em breve ele estará lançando um novo livro. Isso mesmo, olha a capa aqui. Eu, cara, adorei a oportunidade dessa entrevista. Por mais que a gente leia e conheça, é diferente você ouvir de quem viveu a história. E você assistiu aqui essa entrevista exclusiva e inédita, aqui no canal da Revista Asas. Fique com a gente, tem muito mais vindo aí, né, Kowalski? Abraço, foi muito bom tê-lo a bordo. Até a próxima!